Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week I interviewed Jason MacKenzie from Canada, although he's really from all over the world, as he'll explain. And he is a man who writes about grief and specifically tries to help men with our emotional resistance to experiencing grief and dealing with grief. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart because I suffered an event about 8 years ago, almost to the day, that sent me into my first real deep descent into the world of grief and grieving and all the horrors and awful weird experiences that come with that. And so I'm on a different side of that now, but interviewing someone like Jason is so refreshing because I needed someone like him when this happened to me, and I was very lucky and I did find someone who helped me. But all of us need a guide when we're going through grief. My wife is grieving right now the loss of her mother, and it's terrifying and terrible to watch. I truly feel helpless. I try every day to think of creative and inventive ways to try to support her. The most simple thing I'm trying to do is just say yes to everything, unless it's like truly catastrophically an error in judgment, which is actually something we talk about, Jason and I, on this podcast. So I think this is a must listen. I think that no matter who you are, listening to someone who lost his wife and his daughter to suicide talk about how they woke up and faced that. These two events were years apart and they almost mirror each other. So I think this is just a must listen for all of us, because you don't know if and when tragedy is going to knock at your door. But when it does, if you're not prepared, it's extra hard to go through that tragedy. And I do actually believe that every human has their tragedy. He even talks about how whatever the worst thing that happens to you is the worst thing that ever happened to you. And I've thought that myself and experienced it both vicariously and also just in my own life. So I want to thank Jason again for coming on the show. He has a pretty huge audience on Substack and he does a lot of great work. And I'm humbled that he was willing to spend this much time talking to me. And I'm also humbled by you, my audience. So thank you again for checking out the show. And as always, I encourage you to check out mikeyup.com. That's my personal website where I write personal essays that are funny and also try to connect us to our humanity. Last week, as I mentioned at the end of this episode, I wrote about peeing in a rowboat and having kids laugh at me. This week, I'm going to write about something else that's equally disturbing and hilarious. But it's always a place where you can find good old humble Mike just talking about funny stuff. My goal in life was to become a writer, and I am a writer, and it's weird to say that out loud because for many years, even though I was writing and getting paid to write, I did not think I was succeeding as a writer because I thought that I had to be Kurt Vonnegut. I thought my name had to be like in bookstores and everyone had knew me. But now I understand that writers are just writers. We write. It doesn't matter if we write for one person or 400, and the one person could be just you. So if you're out there and you're a young person who writes or creates anything, just remember the whole point is to have fun doing it. Dance like nobody's watching is actually true. So thank you to everyone. It was a little bit short of an intro this week, but I don't know, going through a lot here, not going to burden you with it, but suffice it to say that death and tragedy is knocking at a lot of different doors around me, and I'm just trying to keep the fort together. Maybe I'll open some of the doors, but I'm trying to keep the walls up. So that's what your old friend Mike is doing this week. Much love to all of you, and enjoy this episode. Bye. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week, our guest is Jason MacKenzie. He's a husband, father, and business owner. He's lost a wife and a daughter, and he helps men who are grieving to rebuild their lives after a devastating loss. He helps others with his free, accessible content at grief.tools and on his Substack, which I'm a huge fan of, Man Down headquarters, not spelled out, HQ, substack.com. And of course, in the notes sections will be direct links to both. So if you are inspired and interested in more, it'll be an opportunity to hear what Jason has to say. But I can tell you, I've read a lot of his blogs, and I'm very excited to ask him questions about a lot of things I've encountered and what he's encountered. So with no further delays, Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and the first question we ask every single guest, no matter what, is how old are you, where did you grow up, and what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
Yeah, so I'm 52. I grew up in Canada, but my dad was in the military, so we kind of moved all over the place. So I had the chance to live in Europe. So maybe we'll say no fixed address would probably be the best way to say it. But I spent most of my time in Canada. And then the last question, sorry, what was the last question again?
What generation, if any, do you consider yourself?
Gen X, baby. Like,
awesome.
I was of the generation that was just like devastated when Kurt Cobain died.
Yeah.
I was in mourning.
Yeah. He was my first hero. I literally bought a
Yeah.
guitar because of Kurt Cobain. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's also funny because I've only discussed this with rarely on the podcast, but I started to realize recently how much the Gen X platitude of like "don't sell out" really mind effed a lot of us, because the baby boomer and so-called millennial generations have no issue with what we call selling out. So I've always found that interesting. There's
Yeah, fascinating.
there's like a part of me that doesn't want to sell myself, even though obviously I do. So let's start at the beginning of this phase of your career with the Man Down enterprise that you're building. So I'll just, my audience knows this, but for your benefit, my ex-wife abducted our son when he was 2, and this was about 8 years ago. And that was the first time I encountered what I would consider like male issues with grieving, something that you specialize in. I was unprepared. I didn't think crying was like good for you or something men do. I thought I had to like take the brunt of it all on my own. I wasn't aware of how to talk to other people about it, especially men. And it changed my life. I came out on the other side of it quite positively, and I'm doing this podcast and a lot of things. But like, how did you enter into the same thing? Like, what's your story if you want to start there, or just kind of why are you helping other men?
Yeah. So first, I have a question I would love to ask you. Actually,
Yeah.
is do you remember how you came to have these beliefs about grief and crying? Like, did you, were there direct messaging? Was it like by osmosis?
If I had to guess, it would be watching sitcom television in the 1980s. Shows like Charles in Charge, Saved by the Bell, even. Just these shows that showed men one way. I don't think it was like, it might have been also 80s movies, Ghostbusters, those kind of things, Back to the Future. I don't recall a specific example of it. And it certainly wasn't The Cure singing Boys Don't Cry. Like, that wasn't on my radar. But it was that sort of still thing. Like, I thought that, I don't know. I just thought crying made you, I'm going to use the word pussy, like that definitely rings a bell. So it was probably playground kind of BS. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because I mean, I'm in the same boat where I don't remember. I mean, I do remember my dad, who understandably, I mean, he had a very difficult upbringing. And his messaging was really about logic trumps emotion, was really, and so emotions are unpredictable. They're for women. Logic is for men.
Yeah.
Just be logical, right? but other than that, I don't remember any. Like, I never really saw him cry, but I don't remember any like direct messaging that says that. But I internalized the same thing, and so for me, where I'm at right now is I recognize, through my own personal experience and the experience of talking to tons and tons of other people, is that we as generally as a society, we don't understand death. We don't understand grief. We don't know how to experience grief. We don't know how to talk to people about grief. We oftentimes, because of the way we're conditioned to communicate, when we do try to help someone, we make it worse. So I just, having gone through my own experience of having 2 devastating losses that I navigated in 2 very different ways, with some similarities, but fundamentally it's like some pretty different ways. I understand grief much more deeply, and I understand how it can be a catalyst for change. But I fundamentally just want to, if I can help anyone free themselves from the prison that I locked myself in for many years, man, that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah, and because I'm familiar with your work, is the prison you're referring to like your descent into using alcohol to like numb the pain? Is that
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. Yeah, leading question.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Like I like you, when my wife died. Actually, I'll back up and say, I think you touched on something really important, which is like people don't even understand what grief actually is, and I usually describe it as it's the process of coming to terms with a significant loss, and that loss does not have to be somebody dying necessarily. Like you talked about that, I can't even imagine what that was like with your son. And Jesus, I want to ask you all these questions about it, but we'll go down that rabbit hole some other time, maybe. But that's grief, because it's the loss of the future that you imagined. Your family, your relationship with your son, whatever, your marriage. So it's really about change, and oftentimes it's unwanted change that maybe is like forced upon us. But that's what grief really is. It's a process of coming to terms with that and trying to make sense of this new reality in a way where you can be happy and have some kind of sense of peace and fulfillment. So when I went through my wife's death, I mean, like you, I literally remember thinking, I remember driving off the cemetery, of her, after her funeral, literally thinking these exact words: okay, that chapter's over. It's time to move on. And I literally thought of it as like closing, literally, figuratively, metaphorically closing a door. But the thing is, the 5 years leading up to my wife's death were just like a nightmare, right? So she's a police officer. She had mental health issues. We'll go to the whole story, but it was a 5-year descent into hell, basically, for her and for us. And it ultimately led to her taking her own life. And so there was, to the point we were just talking about, there was grief there too, because I remember walking out of the psychiatrist's office. So being a Generation Xer, my thoughts about psychiatrists were literally from watching Frasier, man, talking about sitcoms. Oh, I'll just she'll go lay down on Niles Crane's couch and get tuned up. Be good. I literally thought that's what happened. And of course, then I realized, and again, I'm not trying to besmirch the profession of psychiatry. I'm only sharing my own personal experience. It was a disaster, man. The guy she saw him for like 15 minutes a month. Our town didn't have a psychiatrist. He pushed medication. That's literally all he did. So I remember one day walking out of that office and realizing she's never, there's almost no chance that we're ever going back to like what we had before. There's no way. No one knows how to fix her. She's getting worse. And so that moment of my future seeming like it was going up in smoke. I mean, there's grief there, man. Because I was very emotionally invested into this future that I thought we were going to have. And so I had to grieve that, which I did not understand at the time either. And so I know I'm kind of monologuing here a little bit, but basically what happened was during her mental health issues, I wanted to make it look like I had my together. I was strong. So I didn't talk to anybody about it, but I was drinking my face off to try to cope with all of the fear and anger and pain and sadness and just watching my wife basically self-destruct and being helplessness. I couldn't do anything to stop it. And so I started drinking. And then once she died and I, quote, moved on, dude, I kept drinking for 5 years almost. And it never occurred to me a single time. And I'm not like a total dummy. I mean, I can be quite dumb at times, but I would say generally I'm not a total dummy. And it never, ever crossed my mind that the drinking was related to the pain, the unresolved pain that I was carrying around. Because I thought grief was for friggin' weak people, for men. Because the reality is the world, you lose, someone dies, or you have some devastating loss or change. The world keeps spinning, man. Stuff still needs to be done. So who else is going to do it? It's got to be me. My wife is dead. And I've been who's got time for that, man? And so it wasn't until afterwards, about 6 months after I stopped drinking, that it became completely obvious to me what the drinking was about, because I started grieving my wife's death once I sobered up, literally 5 years after. So I'll pause there. But yeah, it was a very common thoughts, I would say, about grief, that really kept me very, very stuck.
So how do you feel, this is like jumping, but I think it really is the right time to ask this. What I'm reflecting on as I listen to you is that more than one generation of men has thought the way that you and I were raised, either by culture or whatever, to think, definitely the silent generation, the greatest generation, just stiff upper lip is the entire British culture, for example. And meanwhile, there's a parody going on and a lot of negative talk about the youngest generation right now that's out in high school and college, Gen Z, that they are literally a bunch of emotional, non-logical, use that word for a third time on this podcast. And so it's funny because now I'm thinking about it, I'm how ironic that the very people who are drinking their way through life and not grieving and not doing what you and I both had to do, are the people telling everyone that this is actually a better way to live your life. This is, I'm not even being political, although this is bordering on the politics of like our modern world, which is, I mean, we're clearly seeing a crisis between literally what you said earlier, emotions versus logic. Am I the only one seeing this? Do you see that?
Yeah, I do actually, but I think there's maybe some context because I think that you can be an emotional uh, vampire, let's say. I mean, you can walk around for your whole. We all, whether we're men and we think we don't, we all experience all the human emotions. I mean, it's just part of our humanity. So we can walk around pretending we don't, or trying to hide them or whatever. That's on like the one extreme, which I think is what a lot of guys do, including myself. Then there's the other extreme, which is like, oh, I'm just going to trauma dump my vulnerability vomit all over your face, like whether you are interested in or not, because I'm so self-centered. I think you care. Like, so that's on the other extreme. And I think that being able to marry or find like almost like a nexus of emotional vulnerability and deep personal responsibility for taking ownership over your situation. I think when those two things are present, then emotional, like vulnerability and expressing your emotions actually becomes a point of like connecting between people and helping you process things so you can, again, take personal responsibility to like change your situation. So I do think that I'm a big proponent of like, nobody's going to help you move forward except you, man. Like at the end of the day, like not that nobody's going to help you, but ultimately you're the one who's responsible. There's nobody else. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great answer, because that is, I feel like a furious contradiction in me that you just very well articulated, which is like this. It's logical to feel your emotions, but it's illogical to live in your emotions. So it's like this constant battle. Yeah, and you summed it up perfectly. And especially that last part of like, all these friends came out to visit me, people brought me food, like there was all these things for like a period, but even the best of them, even like my best friends, they still have to go back to their lives. They have to give to their families. They have to be there for other people. So there is like, you shouldn't be an island, but like in your case, you lost the mother of your child and you were like, literally, I mean, it was you and your daughter, you remarried. Again, I know most of your story, or I know the broad details of it. I don't know the intricacies. And, and then your second marriage wasn't exactly like a cakewalk, right? I mean, like the issues carried into it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like, so my marriage, like my wife now, I mean, my first wife too was amazing. I mean, she just succumbed to just a horrible trauma that she had just was not able to heal from. But yeah, my wife, we have a phenomenal marriage. I'm so grateful. And during the time when I was drinking, I mean, she was a really big, it's funny. She's such a smart, intelligent woman. I look back on when we got together and I'm like, your decision-making was so questionable. Like, it's unbelievable to me, like looking back on it with the benefit of hindsight, but be that as it may, it worked out. So maybe it was okay. But I mean, she really was not the only reason, but she really helped me understand the consequences of continuing to drink myself to death, basically, right? I mean, she was like, look, I'm not saying I'm going to divorce you right now. I'm not saying that, but you need to understand that this is not going to be my life. Like, I'm not going to be married to a drunk man. Like, so, and I remember thinking at the time that I don't know. I like when she said that to me, I knew she freaking meant it, man. And I remember thinking at the time, because I tried to quit drinking a million times and failed every time. So I had no confidence that I would be able to stop. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know what I'm going to choose, man. Like, I don't know if I can't not choose booze. Wow. And that feeling of just weakness and just pathetic, just being pathetic, and it was the worst, man. But for me, and I don't know why, but for me, it was a catalyst to say, okay, I got to stop. And eventually, it's been about 11 years and I stopped. But yeah, my point is she played a significant role in it. And she did it by being really, really clear about her boundaries, and communicating in no uncertain terms.
Wow. That's thank you so much. I'm reticent to ask you questions about your daughter because even just thinking about it, well, it's more just on my end. It chokes me up.
Oh.
It's because what I always try to explain to people when I tell them about my son is at least I have the glimmer of hope that I will be reunited, that he'll find me, that he'll come back into my life, that we, I have visions and dreams like where he's holding my hand on my deathbed and we've made up not made up, but just had a life together and it was worth it, and so I'm able to sell myself something that actually does happen. I mean, when I read case studies of like other examples, it's not even an outlier. So my point being, your loss, both of your losses are devastating, but I would say the second one, the loss of your daughter, is like a different thing that usually tears people down and usually changes them for the worse. I can say for a fact that from reading your blogs, which helped me deal with the grief about my son, that you are taking lemons and making incredible lemonade. So I'm curious, do you feel that? Do you feel good like sometimes about it? Like, do you feel like her loss, your loss, was still at least like a vehicle for something good, or is that like beyond something? Hi everybody, this is Mike Oppenheim, the host of Coffin Talk, the show you're currently listening to, and I'm interrupting to ask you if you would mind doing me a favor and subscribing to my online publication called You Are Here on Substack. It features weekly essays. I also have fiction, and of course there are links to the podcast and all the bonus episodes. It's completely free, and I would love your support, so please head over to mikeyop.com, that's MIKEYOPP.com, and sign up today. Thank you. Bye.
Oh no! Like I think that's a great question, and I want to respond to something you said there too, because I think one of the things when a kid dies is, and that I actually think the way people think about it contributes inadvertently to the feeling of isolation that the people who, like the person who lost a child, is that people, I think, naturally think to themselves, okay, that is literally the worst thing that could happen like pretty much the worst thing that can happen to somebody. And so what they do is they compare their to your basically, right? And they're like, well, his is so much worse than mine. I don't even want to bring my, like, whatever I'm going through up but I'm like, so first of all, the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So whatever that happens to be, it's going to be friggin' hard, man. Like, and second of all, for me, like one of the ways that makes me feel good and I think contributes to my healing is to just be able to help people and to be able to be there for them. So if somebody who's suffering some hardship in their life doesn't come to me because they think that it's like trivial, I mean, that's robbing me of the chance to help them in some way if I can. And so I always tell people, like, if you walk around like ripping off, like basically stealing opportunities for people to feel really good about themselves by helping you, that's not a way to build a meaningful life. So, that's one thing. I think the second thing, though, is that, in your situation, the way I think about it is the uncertainty would almost be worse. I think it might even be worse because, man, at least this chapter, like I know basically how it ends. You know what I mean? Like, and not necessarily my chapter, but like my daughter's life. And so, but yeah, to your point, I think for me, as painful as my wife's death was, it wasn't, I mean, it was a shock, but it wasn't like a total shock. Like she had been suicidal before. Like it wasn't like it was completely out of the blue, man. It was like, and I had thought to myself many times, like, if I was in her situation, I cannot imagine I would have lasted as long as she did, man. The pain was so horrific. So I never had any really maybe a few moments, but very little ill will towards her. It was just sad to watch. But and I had healed from that, right? Because after I stopped drinking, I went down this path of became like a personal development junkie or whatever. I started learning some skills. My life just kind of took a different path. But so I was in a good place with Cindy's death. It was like, but when my daughter died, it was like 13 years before. When my daughter died, the problem so first of all, that was orders of magnitude more awful. Like I cannot even imagine anything else that could cause that much pain. I mean, maybe there is, but it's just awful. But the thing is my wife's suicide is what ultimately led to my daughter's death, because it shattered her young soul and she was never able to heal from it. So by the end of her life, you know, it was almost like watching a horror movie version of Groundhog Day, man. Like
Wow.
between the two of them,
Wow.
and being powerless to stop it, because she was 19, she was living on her own, she did not want help. Like it was, and she looked like her mom. She had a birthmark in the same spot. Like it was. I had a few moments of during my daughter's sort of descent, I would say, where I literally had like a PTSD flashback. Like when I was talking to my daughter, it was like I was back talking to my wife. And I remember afterwards being like, oh my God, like that must be PTSD or something, because I was really transported to a different place. And so when my daughter died, I mean, it wasn't just that she died, it was how she died, like, I mean, she was just absolutely out of control, man. Her mental health had just deteriorated, and she was just being so reckless and risky, just like her mom. And she ended up getting a drinking and driving. She was driving like a maniac, driving drunk and stoned. She almost killed 4 people. She got in a head-on collision, died, wasn't wearing her seatbelt. Everybody else survived. The young guy in the car with her, I mean, he spent 4 months in the hospital. I mean, it was the fact that anybody survived that was unbelievable. So the point of that, to answering your question, is in any tragedy, there are gifts, man. There are always gifts that come from it. And they are, when you are in pain, they are really hard to look for, but they're always there. And I think part of healing, so if I look at myself, I mean, we can go into the details or not, but, like, I'm a much more humble person since my daughter died. I've become much more passionate about helping people with grief. I've had a lot of amazing conversations. We are talking, with the conversation we're having right now is because my daughter died ultimately. And so there's part of healing is the transition from looking at it, like looking at the event or the moments leading up to the event as something other than just a horrible, disastrous tragedy, because I mean, with my wife, while I was drinking, I spent 5 years looking at it that way. And it wasn't until I stopped drinking and started grieving and started healing that I actually was able to see, okay, yes, it was a tragedy, but man, it also like contributed to me becoming a better person, still deeply flawed, but like a better person doing different things that feel more meaningful. And, so there's gifts. And so I think that when I'm racked with grief or like, just feeling like, sitting on my couch, her urn is sitting here right beside me. I still haven't figured out what to do with it. Every time I think about what to do with it, I almost have a panic attack. So that just tells me I'm not ready. But when I'm sitting on my couch here every once in a while, and I will clutch her urn to my chest and just bawl my head off, I'm not thinking about the gifts right then. Okay, like as if. But the point is, I know they're there, and when this passes, I'll be able to look for them again, or see them again, or act on them again. So yeah, I think that's just a really, really important part of healing, is remembering that you have the choice ultimately where you direct your attention, and you have the power to choose how you look at things, and that's a power that so many of us give up way too easily, man.
And I'm curious, before I get into a pivotal question of the podcast, which is what do you think happens when you die? I'd like to quickly ask, in your case, you fell into drinking, and then you keep saying, I stopped drinking and then started grieving. However, it begs the question for me, is it that even if you don't have a substance abuse problem, or even if you're not watching too much TV, or even if you're not overeating, like no matter what it is, do you still have to start a process of grieving no matter who you are? Is there like an on switch to that?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I mean, I think that I don't think it's that I didn't in any way grieve her death and then stopped drinking and then like a switch flipped and then I started grieving her death. It wasn't really that. I mean, it was more like I just created much more space for the grieving to happen. Like, I certainly cried about my wife's death while I was drinking, but the amount of space I gave myself to experience grief was much lower, like, it was much smaller. So, because it is the loss of someone you love deeply. I mean, it is a whole life experience. Like, it's mental, it's emotional, it's physical. I mean, you feel like you've been run over by a truck half the time, and so it's a whole experience. And so I definitely did grieve to a certain extent, but the fullness of the grief, like, that didn't actually happen at all until I was, sober for about 6 months and just allowed myself to start experiencing these emotions. And I thought I was going, like, I literally thought I was going crazy, man, because I never allowed myself to spend any time experiencing these emotions, like anxiety and, like, just, I was writing about her. I was going to visit her grave more often. And it was my current wife where I said, I don't know what's happening to me. I can remember where I was sitting when I said this. And I said, I think I'm going crazy. Like, what is this about? Like, do you think this is bizarre that I'm, like, spending all this time thinking and talking about my dead wife? And she goes, no, you're grieving, you idiot. And I remember thinking, or you dummy. She said, you're grieving, dummy. And I remember thinking, that feels true. I literally never thought about it. And so, and one last thing I'll say too on the grief thing, on the drinking is, and maybe I already said this, but I wanted to say it in case I didn't, is that while I was drinking, it literally never occurred to me a single time that these things were related. Drinking in the I think I did mention that, but like, so the grieving allowed me to see that, to see how connected they were.
Well, and I asked too, because I think a lot of people think, like, emotional eating isn't as destructive as drinking, or, like, people love to, like you said, like, people love to compare and and I just always feel like I have to remind people that you can put hierarchies on any of these things if you want to, but it's all the same. Avoidance is avoidance. And so you answered my question wonderfully, because I wasn't able to see that. So I do want to ask the main question of the podcast, because we're a philosophical podcast, as well as helping people out, which is, we're just trying to collect everyone's different version of what they think happens when you die, and kind of what we're proving in your episode, like 255, I think, is that we mostly have different ideas about it, but we all kind of live our life based around that. And so what do you think happens to you when you die is the question. And then I'm also just curious if that changed after the loss of your wife or your daughter.
Well, oh man, that's a great question. 100%. So I grew up, like, again, logic dad, like, basically, I didn't grow up in a, like, vehemently anti-religious home, but he was basically like, religion is the cause of, like, most of the world's problems, and it's basically a salve for the weak-minded. Like, that's how we looked at it, right? So, I never really thought. I mean, we only talked about it a few times, but it was enough for me to be like, yeah, no, like, when he died, it's lights out, and that's it. And I believed that for a long time, and I found as I got older, I think this happens to many of us, hopefully all of us, but we can become, like, the older you get, the dumber you realize you are. And you're like, I don't know anything about anything, basically. Right. And so, I become more open-minded. I think that's a very common thing. Like, where I went from an atheist to, like, an agnostic. Like, how the hell would I know why? Like, how would I have certainty about any of this, man? So then, but what happened was, after my daughter died, and I've always, I started to get interested in not the like scripture, but, like, just the story of Jesus. Actually, I thought was just, like, an interesting historical story, or like a historical events, and I did become interested in a little more interested. This is before my daughter died, about the teachings of Jesus. Like, again, not the religious part of it, but, like, it just, like, they're awesome values, man. Like when you but I hadn't really taken it. I didn't take it any further. So then, when my daughter died, the craziest thing happened, man. Like, so first of all, the night she died, we got all. This is a minor thing, but we got all these pot lights in our living room, and there was a picture of her on the mantle. And the night she died, the pot light right above her picture burnt out. It's still burnt out. It's like burnt out almost 3 years later. And I don't want to fix it. Actually, I don't even know what's wrong with it, but it's something, it burnt out. So right above her picture. But then what happened about a week later, was a buddy of mine who I used to work with him like 10 years ago. I had maybe talked to him, maybe exchanged a couple of Facebook messages like twice over the 10 years, but like really had totally lost contact. And he texted me. I was sitting in the parking lot, maybe about a week or week and a half after Chloe died. And I was just sitting there crying, going through old texts. And he reached out to me and he goes, "Hey man, I had this, first of all, I just want to check in and just tell you how sorry I am." And then I said, "Yeah, I really appreciate that." And then about 5 minutes later, he emails me. He goes, "I really need to talk to you, man." And he goes, "I got to tell you about something that happened. And I don't even know why I actually feel like I have to tell you, but I have to tell you. And I'm worried that you're going to think I'm crazy when I tell you this." I'm like, "I'm not going to think you're crazy, man." So, so I still have no idea what this is about. So anyways, we get on the phone and he goes, "Last night I was sitting on the couch and I was having I was just in that like liminal space between wakefulness and sleep." And he goes, "All of a sudden I had this image, like so vivid, of the number 444 flashing, like, and he's like 444. It was so intense, and I have no idea what that means or anything. So I'm not into like numerology, so I went and looked it up, and what it means is like I don't know the numerological system or whatever, but he looked it up and it means like a guardian angel, which is cool. But here's the thing. He goes, "I don't know why I have to tell you this." He goes, and I said, "Man, I was just sitting there. I was like, get this. Like literally a couple months before Chloe died, she got 444 tattooed."
Whoa.
On her body. Like, come on, man.
Wow.
Yeah, like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's insane.
That's
and
really insane. Wow.
Yeah, like there's zero chance that's some kind of coincidence to me. So
yeah.
So
wow.
So that really opened my mind about that there's so just really opened my mind and really brought me a sense of peace. And then I've done a lot of not a lot, but I've done like some psychedelic therapy, guided psychedelic, as part of the healing process. And I've had some pretty powerful revelations there. But what I find myself doing now is actually being really more interested in Christianity from a more of a biblical point of view. And I literally just emailed some buddies today who are like pretty into it, and they have a little Bible study where they read like a verse. And I just said, "Hey, can I join your group?" So I don't actually believe, like I want to believe. I'm not there yet, man. But,
yeah. No, I'm following. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think that like I just want to incorporate these teachings, but I think more intentionally into my life. And if something happens as a result of that, great. But I don't know that I know 100% what happens, but what I do know is I'm very confident she's okay and that I will see her again in some form. And, I find that helpful at times. Like other times it doesn't matter because I just miss her so much. But, and then sometimes maybe I have doubts about that. Like, is that even true? But for the most part, like when I look at that story, and a few of the other things that have happened, I just think, man, like there's no way it ends when we depart this mortal coil. And I just feel confident I'll see her again in some way.
Yeah, that gels really well with me. And I think, I alluded earlier to like having these powerful dreams. The weirdest thing about these dreams is every time I'm on the brink of giving up or just like deciding not to mail cards to the only mailing address I have and like hoping my son gets these things I send, I get these dreams. I get these like powerful dreams where we're just hugging in like time and space. Like it's not even like in a room or specific, and it's the actual feeling. And so I wake up with the real feeling I used to have hugging my 2-year-old. Like it's palpable, it's real, and it just keeps me going until the next time I get to that cliff. So I not only loved your story, I mean, seriously, like huge goosebumps when you said the 444 tattoo thing. I mean, that's actually crazy. And I love how you phrased it. Like, people, I had a person who helped me after the thing that I suffered through, and she said, it's only a coincidence if you call it a coincidence. And I like how you phrased it too. You're just like, I'm just like, I can't see it as one. And so I not only commend you for everything you've told us and how you've lived your life, but we are nearing the end of the interview, so I always give my guests the floor to just kind of say one more thing to our audience that they want to say. If there's anything we didn't get to touch on, like I said, there will be notes for how to find you and get support from you. But and if you want, you could tailor it to my wife just lost her mom, so I don't know if you have any like great advice for that situation. Because I think one thing you said that I hope to relate to her, she'll watch this because she's a producer of the show, is just the part about thinking you're going crazy when you're actually just grieving. Because that's something I keep trying to tell her is like, you know, no matter what thoughts you have, like I'm not here to judge them, you know, and feel free to talk about your mom as much as you want. So
no, I think that's a really good point. Is that I think what people don't, there's I think a few things that it would be I found helpful to understand is that when you lose someone you love at the beginning, the pain is so intense, and it's really, but at the same time, it's really easy to connect the pain to the loss of the person that you love. But when you fast forward like a year or 2 years, it's almost like mold, like that gets into every nook and cranny. And what happens is it starts popping up in your life. The ways are that, like, you might be having an anxiety attack about something on a Tuesday a year and a half from now, and you don't realize it's actually like related to grief, you know? So the connection between them becomes less obvious, which is why to me, it's more important like to just sit with it, and rather than trying to like distract it or change it. And it's hard to do that, but it's in the sitting with it and facing it that I usually get the insights about like what this is actually about, right? And so, but it can be very confusing. And I think the other thing I would say too is that when you lose someone you love, a good chunk of the people in your life are going to disappoint you with how they show up or don't show up, you know, and all that. And what I just think it's such an important part of healing to accept that everybody's doing the best they can. And if they could be doing better, they would. Because what happens is if you start resenting that, I mean, you may have heard this quote, but like resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So the way I think about it is, you don't know why they are not like, let's say, for example, they just don't bring up the person you lost. You know, that's what often happens. And, you know, you're like, wow. So what we do is we don't know why why they're not mentioning this person. So as human beings, we don't like an incomplete picture. So we make up a story to complete the picture. And because we're humans and we have like this negativity bias, the story we make up is almost always the worst version. They're not asking about my daughter because they literally just don't give a shit. You know, they don't care about me. They're so self-absorbed in their own life, you know, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden I don't like these people. Where what I always tell people is, look, if you're going to make up a story about somebody else's intentions, why don't you just make up one where they're good? Like, because it's better for you. So if I have some friends, and let's say for me, I would just like I would just address this with them. But like a lot of people don't want to address these issues. They feel weird about it or whatever. So if I'm going to make up a story, but they're not talking to me, they're not bringing up my daughter because they don't care. That's toxic to me, man. It's not toxic to them because I don't mention it to them. It's toxic to me. So why don't I just make up a better story? And then, because that makes it easier for me to continue to love them, you know, but also it's actually probably more true than the negative version. So just be careful, be careful of the stories that you're telling yourself about other people's motivations and intentions, because it can make a bad situation even worse than it already is.
Wow. Thank you so much. Everyone, this is Jason MacKenzie. He is totally available. He has a great online presence. I cannot stress enough how helpful his Substack is, mandownhq.substack.com. He really puts himself out there, and he gives succinct advice, but within a story. So I like the way you do it too, Jason. So again, really encouraging people, if you liked the way he spoke today, there's a lot more of that online, and he's accessible, and he can also work directly with you if you need help
help. So if you're grieving and you need help, you need help. You're not wrong. So please find someone at the very least to talk to, and Jason is one of them. And for everyone else, thank you again for tuning in to Coffin Talk. My name, as always, is Mike Oppenheim. I'm the host of the show, and the best and only way to support the show is to head over to my Substack at mikeyop.com. That's MIKEYOPP.com. I write hilarious and thought-provoking essays about humanity. They're usually very deeply personal, and they're not all depressing, and they're easy to read and funny. Did I mention that? Because people seem to keep telling me I should say that because they think I just write these bland things. So like last week was about the time I peed myself in a rowboat and everyone laughed at me and I still can't get over it. Things like that. So if you like comedy and you like personal essays, please head over to mikeup.com. And as always, thank you for tuning into Coffin Talk, and please support Jason MacKenzie. There will be ways to find him in the notes. My name is Mike Oppenheim. Thank you very much. We will see you soon. You are the moon.